For the fifth assignment, I am going to disassemble and later reassemble a Dell CPU. A quick look around the chassis shows us that there are multiple ports on the backside and the chassis has multiple grills for allowing air passage. On removing the side panel, the motherboard becomes visible. We also find two enclosures. The bottom one happens to be the power unit. I go on to remove the front panel and find that the other enclosure holds the DVD writer. I carefully remove this frame from the body and find that this also holds the hard drive securely. At this point, we can see that both the DVD writer and the hard drive has two PCI cables connecting it to the motherboard, and each receives a power input from the power unit. The DVD writer has a special frame that mounts it to the chassis. I later tried to open up the DVD writer but found that it had been sealed very carefully to avoid the entry of dust particles, and hence I was unsuccessful. Now that we have stripped the front unit, we can see the entire motherboard and the fan. Let us give it power, and if we check, we have post button right here, and pressing that we can see that the fan is working, and this is the part that creates all the sound when the computer runs. So now we'll be opening the fan and seeing what these fins and heat sinks, how they work. The fan is a standalone unit with a motor inside it. We can see the copper coils if we look carefully. Below this we find a circular heat sink which is made of aluminum. It is pressure mounted onto the processor. On the back side of the heat sink we find that there is already dried up thermal paste, and the same can be also seen on the processor. On cleaning the dried up paste, we can see that this is an Intel Pentium chip. On picking up the chip from the socket, I found that it was pretty heavy, much more than I had expected. On the back side of the chip, we see several contact patches, and there are several pins in the socket on the motherboard which allows the motherboard to communicate with the chip. Modern day processors have several cores pressed on the same die, and hence they produce a lot of heat. However, for sustained performance and to avoid failures, we need a solution that removes this heat from the processor as fast as possible. Air cooling of processors is very common these days. The heat sink is made up of fins that help to dissipate heat to the atmosphere, which is mounted by a fan that causes forced convection for faster dissipation of heat. Such heat sinks can be found in a variety of geometries as shown in the figure. To improve thermal contact between electronic components and heat sinks, it is necessary to use thermal paste. Thermal paste is a dense compound material that is usually made of zinc oxide and silicone, and it is characterized by high thermal conductivity. For homemade applications, toothpaste is an excellent alternative as a thermal paste because of its high thermal conductivity. It also does not liquefy at higher temperatures and does not destroy the motherboard. After reassembling the major components, I do a quick post test which tells me that the circuitry is fine. However, I find that the computer is not turning on. I find that I had misplaced the power supplies to the DVD writer and the hard drive, which was causing the error. The computer now starts up. So let's put it back together and see if it actually boots up the operating system. While the computer boots up, there have been many things that I have learned doing this assignment. I learned about Phillips head screws, Allen screws, how the different components of a system are put into different enclosures to protect them, and how their wiring is done in a neat and color-coded fashion. I also learned about heat sinks and how they are used to dissipate heat from any electronic component. I learned how disassembly has to be in a structured manner so as to remember where the parts go and to keep account of the various screws. The computer has finally booted up and I have been successful in not completely bricking my PC.